Morning, everybody. We'll get started here in a couple minutes, a little bit before 10. So we'll get started here in a couple minutes, right? 9:58. So we'll give people another minute to log in.
Morning, Joe.
Kyle, how you doing?
Doing all right. Thanks for having this call.
Yeah, absolutely. Glad you could join and hang out. How's for those others listening here on the call? Kyle heads up the Gretna Youth Baseball League. How's that coming along? You guys thinking you're going to get any games in?
Just sitting in on the hold pattern right now. So
Yeah.
Everything's canceled, I think, through at least mid-May. So we got a few more weeks before we got to make any big decisions on the full season.
Yeah. Kind of in limbo like a lot of people. So.
Hey, Joe. This is
Kyle.
Hey, thanks for doing this, man. We
Absolutely.
appreciate it.
Happy to help and glad you could join. So thanks for being here, Kyle.
You bet.
We got a couple more logging in. We'll wait another minute.
I might have to leave a little bit early, Joe, but again, thanks for everything. I got patients here starting another half hour or so. So
that's unacceptable, Kyle. No, I'm just kidding. No, it's all,
I know, right?
I get it. We're busy. That's good. You got patience. Happy to hear that. So
no
worries, man. Glad you're here when you can be here. So it's all good. Still got a few logging in, so we'll give it another minute. It's 10 on the dot, but we will get started here in another minute or two. I'll tell you what, we'll do some housekeeping items before we dive into the material. So there is a chat function, so feel free to use that to throw out questions or interact with others in the group. It's a roundtable discussion. So I'm leading, I'm host, but that doesn't mean I have all the answers. So if you know of some information and want to share that, use the chat, or you can come off mute and join the call. You're welcome to do that as well. And the more feedback, the purpose of these calls is the more feedback, the more minds we put together, the better. So certainly jump in if you would like, if there's questions or if you have something to add to the discussion, by all means, please feel free. We'll get started in 1 minute here. I see a couple more still logging in. I got a good group today. Hey, Vic.
Hi, Joe.
How you doing?
I'm doing fine.
Oh, good.
Yeah, you bet.
Glad you're here.
Just keep working at it.
That's all we can do, right? That's all we can do right now. All right. Well, we're going to get started here. Let's see. Yeah, if you're not on mute, go ahead and mute yourself. I think everybody's muted, so we don't get any feedback. But again, if you want to unmute yourself and jump into the call, feel free. That's perfectly fine. Let's see. All right, so there's a couple topics happening. We'll get started. There's a couple topics happening this week. Obviously, the PPP is the big thing. Many applied, or if you're on the other side of the fence, maybe didn't get everything turned in, and now funds are gone. So I'm going to start with a little bit there, but I do want to address some other things outside of PPP on this call as well, and we'll get to there. I'm going to throw some things out to think about a little bit, then I'm going to dive back into the PPP, and then we can open it up for anything. But with or without PPP, just think about how you're going to move forward. All right. What are you doing to prepare for after that 8 weeks of cash flow? Whether you got it or maybe you didn't do it, maybe that's a little bit more of reality now. Think about that. I think that's an important discussion. That was somebody had emailed that to me, and hit on that a little bit, but I think it's important that we have a discussion about that and what others are doing out there. So we'll kind of dive back into that. I'll reopen that topic after I address some of the PPP stuff, because I think that's on everybody's mind right now, with or without the loans. So keep that in mind. But starting out the call with the PPP stuff. So everybody heard the funds are dried, right? They're gone. But if you submitted an application to your bank and you received approval, okay, your funds are in reserve for you. That's the best way I can put that. So they will be dispersed. So even if you haven't physically received the money yet, that's okay, as long as you were approved by your bank. Now, double check with your banker, right? Because they're ultimately the one that is in charge of that, not me. But if you received approval for your PPP loan, even if you haven't received the money, don't fret. You should be getting that here very, very soon. Once you get that money in your account, well, actually, let me step back. Once you're approved from your bank, they need to disperse that to you within 10 days. Okay, so that's how that goes. So once you're approved, they've got 10 days to get you that money. So you can't put that out to, well, I want this in May or whatever it would be. They've got 10 days to get it to you, like it or not. So that's how the funds go if you're approved by your bank. Now, part of that money that was dried up and gone, that money's still yours. So basically you had your spot in line for some of that money if you were approved. I'm going to address the other side of it now. If you didn't get approved, or maybe you didn't even apply yet, what should you do now? So that's, a lot of questions came into our office at Ideal Payroll about that. What do I do now? How can I get this? And so the best advice I can give, and if there's a banker on the line, please jump in. I invited a few, but I don't know if they'll make it because they're pretty busy. But if you didn't get the money yet, or didn't get approved for any PPP loans, talk to your banker. After you hang up on this call, get a hold of your banker, get your application in, and get them all the information you need. Because likely, it looks like they're going to come to some sort of agreement in Congress, maybe today or tomorrow, is everything I've read this morning, to replenish the funds. All right. So if you didn't get it the first round, they should be coming out. Nothing's official yet, but there should be more money coming. So get your place at the bank now. The bank cannot submit your information to the SBA. So it can't fully go through the process if it's a new application, but your bank can keep your application in their line because they're going to have another line. So if you didn't get it the first time, best advice right now is to get your stuff into your bank as if you're applying for the last round and just wait for the next round. Now, if you can't wait that long, because who knows when that will actually come through, hopefully it's in the next couple of days, then that's another discussion that we can have later on, kind of what I was alluding to earlier about what should you do here once this money is gone after the 8 weeks. But if you didn't get any money yet or didn't get approved for money yet, still work with your banker and get in line. That's the best advice there, okay? So fill out everything as if you were applying. I'm hearing what I read this morning was there'll be another $310 billion or something in there. So there should be money. Hopefully it goes to the right places. All right. Now, if you did get money or did get approved, forgiveness is really the topic now. So we made it through phase one. Everybody got their applications in, got approved. Okay, Stacy, I'm sorry. Before I get there, I have a question about getting in line at the bank. Go ahead, Stacy, in the chat, or come off mute and go ahead with your question.
Sorry about that. So my question for you is, we have not yet applied. Our application wasn't done by the time the funds ran out. And
Okay.
Our bank told us, don't send in your application. We're going to deny it. And then you will just have to resubmit it. We're not accepting anybody else in line. And I'm just curious if anybody else had gotten that message from their banks, if they had not yet completed their application by this time. And maybe that's changed today. That was news from late last week.
It's an interesting response.
Yeah.
But, anybody else out there have any feedback in the chat or come off mute for Stacy? I have my own thoughts on that, but anybody else that actually went through that experience? Anybody? Okay.
Oh, so it's just our great bank.
What bank are you working with, Stacy? I haven't heard that. The bank I work with has been very supportive, so I'm curious what bank you're working with, or are you comfortable saying that?
I don't know.
But before you go there, I will say this is recorded and will be put out in public, so just FYI.
Disregard.
No, I'm
Yeah,
not.
yeah. Who was saying that? I couldn't see anybody pop up.
My name's Kyle.
Okay. And you work for a bank?
No, I've got two small businesses, but I'm just saying that my bank was very supportive in helping me with a lot. I'm just curious. That's
Okay.
a different feedback than I've heard from any other bank.
Well, since you have a great banker, obviously, do you mind sharing who your banker is?
I've worked with Union Bank and Trust,
Okay.
and I've had a fantastic relationship. I know other bankers well, and so I don't want to just exclusively talk about them, but that's who I personally do business with.
Okay. Okay. And we'll call our bank, excuse me, today and see if there's any, change in their tune.
Okay.
Thank you, Joe.
Yeah, absolutely, Stacy. So it's a good question. If your bank was saying you're going to be denied or something, reach out to them, get clarification on that. Now, here's the thing with the PPP is you don't have to use your home bank. So even though you bank there, you can go to an alternate bank that you have no relationship with. Now, I did hear there were some of those banks that were saying, we're not, we're so flooded with applications, we're not going to open it up to non-customers. But there were some that were taking those. From the feedback I saw, a lot of the smaller banks were able to handle that a little better. So you might be better off going with somebody, a little bit smaller than the other guys out there that are humongous. But I hadn't heard that exact scenario that Stacy, you described where they said you're going to be denied and that would be a problem. That seems a little, I don't know. Again, I'm not a banker, just play one on Zoom, but I would talk to your bank and then maybe counterbalance that with reaching out to some other banks. That would be my best advice there.
Thank you so much for
absolutely.
everyone.
Absolutely. Hopefully that helps. Let's see. And again, I will mention this is being recorded. It'll be put out there. So if you have a specific question, try to keep it generalized or, reach out after the call or whatever needs to be done. Okay, a couple questions already flooding in before I dive into some of this, but let me see if I can wrap it up here. Are the proposed new funds for the larger EIDL loans too, or just PPP loans? I believe it's for both. Somebody can correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe it is for both sides. And there were some additional stuff in there. I think that's what they're negotiating, but I believe it would be both the EIDL and the PPP program. So some other banks did some good jobs. So check this chat there. Let's see. Maybe some bad jobs, but let's see. I'm just going through the chat here. Good experiences. Okay. Wonderful. All right. So if you did get the loans, so if you didn't get the loans, let me just rehash that. Check with the existing bank relationship you have, and then if you're not getting the answer that is satisfactory, call around. And there are many good banks out there. Reach out to me. I have some great contacts if you need. Happy to share those with the banking community. If any of those bankers that I invited would have been on the call, shout out to them for next time. That would have been a good opportunity to jump in. Anyways, we'll get to that later. Let's see. Talking about forgiveness. So let's dive into that section because a lot of those folks that did get the funds are wondering, how can I ensure that I get forgiveness on this loan? And here's the short answer is there's more guidance needed. All right. So if you have a really detailed, minute question, likely it hasn't been answered yet by anybody. So we should be seeing some guidance by the end of this month, I think, from the SBA that needs to come out on some really specific questions. I'm going to go over some of the general stuff today. And again, feel free to jump in with questions on that. Or if I don't know the answer, I'll tell you I don't know the answer. But if you know something more than I do, feel free to jump into the chat or come off mute. But the best advice out there about forgiveness is to plan ahead. That's number one. So when you get your funds, create an estimate on your timetable. So the 8-week clock to spend those funds starts from the day you receive it. So the day it gets into your bank account, that 8-week clock starts. So plan ahead. Look at a calendar and see what's out 8 weeks and compare that to your payroll calendar and how that's going to coincide with paying out employees. All right. So that's number one is plan ahead during the moment, right? Don't wait till after the fact when the 8 weeks are done and you're like, did I spend everything? Do it as you go. So week by week or however often you want to do it. It's easy to get caught up, in our businesses where we get behind on some of that stuff, but this is critical for your forgiveness is to plan ahead. That's number one. Number two is track everything possible. So have a centralized location where you're tracking all of this. There is not a designated SBA form or anything else like that out there right now. to officially track this. Your bank may have a form. Reach out to your CPA. They may have a form, things like that. At Ideal Payroll, we can provide you a report that will at least do the payroll side of it, but there's some other pieces to that you want to combine with that report, okay? So track everything you can in a centralized location so you have it available. And again, that kind of goes hand in hand with planning, where you can know where you're at 4 weeks into this versus 7.5 weeks into this, and you're scrambling at the end. So track it and work with your accountant, work with your CPA, and work with your banker. If you're unsure if something is going to be, qualified as forgivable, ask. Okay. Also, I have the number to the SBA. All right? I called them this morning and actually talked to them about a couple scenarios that were thrown at me over the weekend on some emails. But 402-221-4691. This is the SBA line. 402-221-4691. Call them and ask them. If you're unsure, that's a great resource. They're the ones that are heading this up. They may not know either, honestly, because again, further guidance is needed from high levels up, but it doesn't hurt to ask. So work with your accountant, work with your banker, and go direct to the SBA when in doubt, okay? All right. Let's see, is this a question? I think I was advised to set up a new checking account with my bank and transfer the exact amount that was used for payroll to that account for auditing purposes. All right. So Kyle, that's a good point. Thanks for bringing that up. When you get the funds, it may or may not go into a separate a separate PPP account, or it may go directly into your regular bank account. Every bank's a little different. We've seen it done different ways. It doesn't have to go directly into its own new payroll account. That's not required at all, okay? What is required is to track things, and there's gonna be an audit at the end of this. If you do set up a separate payroll account for the PPP funds just to run payroll out of, just know it's not gonna be perfect at the end, all right? Because you have other expenses. Number one, you have rent and utilities and things like that. Number two, there's portions of payroll that aren't going to qualify for this, such as the employer federal tax, okay? So if all taxes are coming out, if we run your payroll, for example, at Ideal Payroll, and we withdraw all of your taxes, part of that includes the federal payroll tax that's due, right? That is not part of the forgiveness, is the employer federal payroll tax. Part of the employer tax, the state unemployment tax, does apply. So it's kind of convoluted there. So you're going to need a paper trail. You're going to need an audit report. We have that available, whether you use a separate bank account or not. Okay, so there's some nuances there with using the accounts. Yeah, just know that just because your account may be drained down to zero and it's only your PPP funds, not all that may apply. Okay, or the reverse. If you're doing direct deposit as an example, and direct deposits coming out of your PPP account, the PPP is based on gross payroll. The forgiveness is based on gross, not net. Only net would be coming out from direct deposit. I'm getting into some payroll details, so a lot of eyes are probably glazing over right now, but just bear with me and understand that just because you have a separate PPP account, if it goes down to zero, doesn't mean it's perfect. You still got to track all your expenses. You still got to prove where it went. That's the same amount of work is going to be required in the end. Now, some banks require a new account. If you're using a different bank than who you normally bank with, you're going to have a different account. So there's a lot to consider there, okay? Every situation's a little bit different, but just know that there's not a perfect system other than working with your CPA, working with your banker, and tracking that stuff to make sure that you're getting the full amount forgiven is the word I was looking for. All right, there's a couple things in the chat. Let's check this out. The report Ideal Payroll sent me was awesome. Thanks, Bob. It was what my bank needed. And so that report, if you are a client of ours, wonderful, thank you. If you're not, that's okay too. But if you are and you have access to our online portal, that report is available where you can run that same report for a date range. So from the day your 8-week clock starts until whenever you want during that 8 weeks, and you can see where you're at from a payroll standpoint, it'll give you that same information, which is really helpful as you go. We're in the process of hiring a new employee when COVID hit. Can I hire a new staff member and use the funds from that staff member as well? Okay, the question is, can I use the funds for a new staff member? And the answer is yes. So it doesn't have to be the same people that were working for you before. And if you're paying more people or more payroll, that's wonderful. Okay, that's what the purpose of the program is to stimulate employment. And if you go over what you were previous, I'll get into some specifics, but if you go over what your previous levels were, that's perfectly fine. The funds can be used for that, yes. Let's see, a friend of mine was able to get his severance package money in his check. Okay, Denny, might want to expand on that a little bit, Denny. If you want to come off mute or hit up the chat here. Let's see, gross payroll plus the employer portion of, is that you, Denny?
Oh yeah, I was just going to say that they were happy that they have one of their highest paid employees left a month before this happened, took a severance package for 6 months, and they were able to include that in the check that they received. That's
okay.
all.
Yeah. Yep. Good point. So if they quit before all of this, they would be part of that calculation of the money they received. So good point, Denny. Thank you for sharing. Gross payroll plus the employer portion of health insurance premium. Correct. Yes. The employer portion of health insurance premium is included. Yes. As well as retirement. Also, this is on when it is paid or when it is accrued. So this is a great question. We're getting a little ahead of my notes, but that's okay. We'll just dive right in. So when are the expenses? Let me come back to that. Let me go through a couple things that are required. Then I'm going to come back to your question about when expenses count, essentially. So, all right, if you're tracking for forgiveness, there's certain things. Again, this is high level, but there's certain things to pay attention to. One is gross payroll, okay? So gross payroll is if I work 10 hours at $10 an hour, I earned $100 gross payroll. It's before any deductions. It's before any taxes come out of my check, all right? So gross payroll, the employer portion of health insurance, employer portion of retirement plans, in addition to that, and then state and local tax that is paid on that, such as state unemployment tax, if you're here in Nebraska. If you're somewhere else, other local or state taxes may apply. So that's number one, is gross payroll. And you need to, so the second part of this is it's the 75-25 rule, all right? So you need to spend at least 75% of your loan amount on the payroll portion of this, all right? So the majority, 75% has to be paid on payroll expenses. And that's in order to get full forgiveness. So if you spend less, you will get less forgiveness. It's not an all or nothing, but you will get less forgiveness. So in order to ensure full forgiveness, spend 75% of your loan amount on gross payroll. And then those employer items that I mentioned earlier. Compensation levels need to remain the same that they were prior to this all happening, okay? And the time period I saw on that is basically Q1. So January 1 through February 29th or maybe March 31st. If somebody knows that answer, jump in, because I don't remember exactly what I saw. Did I hear somebody come off mute?
February 15th.
There we go. February 15th. Thank you. So well, let's discuss it. Is that Adrian, I think?
Yes.
All right. So I saw it was a time period. Are you saying exactly on February 15th, or what did you see?
Well, they're looking at the employee headcount as of February 15th.
Okay. So what I saw was there was going to be an average made from two periods, and it depended on which one you wanted to take. One was from February 15th, 2019 through June 30th, 2019. And then the second period was from January 1, 2020 through February 29th, 2020, and doing an average full-time equivalent calculation on those periods. Does that jive with anything you saw, or did you see anything different, Adrian?
Well, most of the stuff they've been using on a calendar year, 2019, when you're calculating the average cost, right? Is that what you're talking about?
So this would be for the full-time equivalent, headcount, and compensation levels for forgiveness when figuring if those match up. So you've got to have the same wages paid and same headcount at the end of your 8 weeks.
The February 15th date that he's talking about, it comes into play with some of the expenses. So if you signed a new lease for rent, it has to be February 15th or prior. It can't be on a new lease, which was something for us because we're in an office share situation. So we had signed a new lease for a new staff member on February 20th. So when we're using our forgiveness, we have to be careful to exclude that one office from all of the other rent. So there are some things when it comes to February 15th. I saw them more on the expenses side.
Okay. Thank you, Abby. That's helpful. So again, further guidance is going to be needed on some of this, but in general, these are the rules to get forgiveness would be use gross pay. You've got to spend 75% of your loan amount on payroll expenses. You've got to keep your compensation levels that were there prior to the COVID pandemic at the end of June 30th, basically up through your 8 weeks, and then through June 30th. You've got to keep that same compensation level and then the same head count, so employee level. So you've got wages and employees that you have to maintain through June 30th, or your 8 weeks, however that might coincide differently. But you have until June 30th to get them back to those levels. So if you laid people off, 3 weeks ago because of the pandemic, you can actually rehire those positions. Doesn't have to be the same people, just those positions up until June 30th, and that would qualify. I was diving in this morning into because the question comes up, how do I figure out what a full-time equivalent employee is if I have a bunch of part-time employees? And there's some calculations on that. I'm not going to get into that on this call because it gets a little detailed, but there's some calculations where you can figure out number of hours worked between employees and that sort of thing. A question I believe is still out there is, does a full-time count as 30 hours or 40 hours? And from everything I read, further guidance is needed on that. I don't think there's an exact answer to that. But again, to recap, to make sure that your forgiveness is fully used, spend as much as you can on gross payroll, get your wage levels back to where they were prior to this situation, and then get your head count back to where they were prior to this situation. And you have a grace period until June 30th to do that.
What was the second time period that you said for employee head count would be calculated?
So what I saw was the second one was basically Q1, part of Q1 was January 1st, 2020 through February 29th, 2020. The first one was February 15th, 2019 through June 30th, 2019. I don't know where that came from, quite honestly. That's in the documentation I read over the weekend on this stuff.
I agree with you,
Okay.
Joe.
Okay, that jives with what you know too, Adrian. Thank you. All right, I think there were some chat questions, so I'm going to get into that quick. Make sure we get caught up there. Are you able to run extra payrolls during that 8-week period for hours worked and held? Okay, this is a common question we're getting on the payroll side is, can I run extra payrolls? All right, I threw this out to multiple bankers and the SBA this morning, and most of them didn't have an issue with running multiple payrolls. All right, what my recommendation is, check with your specific bank, okay? Because ultimately they're the ones going to do this audit, and they're going to decide if you get the forgiveness or not in conjunction with the SBA. So run this by your bank. But the ones I asked were okay with additional payrolls being ran. Let's say you let's say your 8 weeks ends on the 12th of June, but your next pay date isn't until the 15th. Bumping that into the 12th seemed to be okay. And again, these are just interpretations. This is not final guidance or anything like that. Some other questions similar to that I've seen out there. Can we run bonuses for employees? Can we increase wages temporarily for employees? And I talked directly to the SBA this morning. And again, they said further guidance was needed on that stuff. The bankers I talked to said to tread lightly. If it's outside your normal, this is the general consensus from the conversations I've had. If it's outside your normal activity of business, be careful. Is anybody going to be looking that closely at what wages are classified as? Who knows? Again, that might be up to your specific lender. Is it worth risking that to, have to pay back a loan? I don't know. That's up to you to decide. I would say reach out to your lender ahead of time before you make those decisions and just get their input. They're either going to tell you yes or no, and you'd rather have that answered up front than later. So there is no guidance right now directly from the SBA or in the written law as to, do bonuses. Can I give everybody a one-time bonus, or, can I temporarily raise their salary, things like that? There's no exact guidance that I've seen. If somebody knows different, please jump in. But my advice would be run that by your accountant, run that by your bank, call the SBA, do your due diligence before you make those decisions. Assuming, don't assume that you're going to get forgiveness on kind of these one-off types things in order to use up the funds. Joe, can you share what report that is called to allow us track? Yeah, I will. So Ideal Payroll has a specific report. It's called the, now you're putting me on the spot, I believe it's the CARES Paycheck Protection Program Act report. So just search for CARES, CARES, in the client reports. I will send out an email with that as well later to our clients, so you guys can track that down. But it's a really good report to look for. What date is the employee headcount locked in? So my understanding, that's a good question. My understanding of how they will calculate the employee headcount is based on an average of your 8 weeks of the loan period. So you'll do an average of that compared to the average of that time period we mentioned before, likely going to be January 1 through February 29th. There was a time period from 2019 you could possibly use as well. But they'll compare your headcount. And again, what is a full-time equivalent employee? If you have a bunch of part-time employees, that hasn't exactly been finalized yet. But you can make some guesstimates on what you'll look like there. When in doubt, go high. I happen to run a payroll for 430 before I received the PPP, but the payroll is not run until next week and I received the money. So does that count? Okay. So the question is, I think this is the question, just correct me if I'm wrong. I processed the payroll earlier than my check date, obviously. I got the PPP funds in between when I processed and when the check date is. I think that's what you're asking here, Mike. The question that comes down to really is it cash or accrual? And I asked the SBA this morning and they didn't give it an answer. So I think that's still up in the air. If somebody knows different, please jump in. I would assume what my plan is to spend all the money during the time period of those 8 weeks. And so if just because you process the transactions and the data doesn't really matter, okay, if that was ahead of time, but if that check date is in that 8 weeks, you should be good. All right, so if you got the money today and your check date is tomorrow, even though you processed payroll last week, you should be okay because that check date is really when those audit reports are going to show what was spent during that period. Okay, that's how I'm approaching this. If you have a question, again, reach out to your lender. The SBA didn't have exact guidance on that yet. Again, if somebody knows different than that, please jump in. I would just recommend do your best to spend as much of that money directly on a cash basis in that period, and you should be safe. If you have a pay period coming up at the end of your 8 weeks and it's not paid out until after the 8 weeks, that's really where the question would come in. I don't know the answer to that, and that would be further guidance is needed from the SBA on that. Hopefully that helps, Mike. Can you please define FTE? I'm Rich, I'm sorry. Yeah, unfortunately right now I can't. There's no exact guidance out there. I saw some averages using 30 hours. I saw some averages using 40 hours a week. Some prior SBA stuff was using 30, like, the ACA uses 32, different things like that, or 30. So there's different numbers out there, but nothing is finalized yet. Unfortunately, I don't know the answer on how to calculate a full-time equivalent employee when you have multiple part-time. Maybe do your best estimate, from 30 and 40 and kind of see where you lined up right now. Again, by the end of the month, hopefully we have further guidance on that. Same total wages or same wages per employee for forgiveness? That's a good question, because you might have different employees. I know we have Adrian's on the line and maybe some others that can help. The question is, so when trying to calculate equivalent wages during your 8 weeks versus prior to all of this, is it based on total wages or wages per employee? Does anybody have any feedback on that?
That's going to be an average, Joe.
An average, okay. So that would mean, Rich, to your question, if you're using an average, it wouldn't have to be the exact same employees. I thought I saw some language where there was something along those lines, if the same person is employed, but if you have different people employed, then it might not matter, right? So right now, go with average. There may be further guidance on that, but that's an excellent question. No annual raises during the 8 weeks, correct? No, I'm sorry. Let me clarify that. If it's in your normal business operations, this is what the SBA essentially relayed, and the banks, is that in regards to raises, you can give raises, and that's fine, especially annual raises or permanent raises. Where I would recommend you check with your banker and tread lightly is if it's a temporary raise only for those 8 weeks. So if somebody's at $10 an hour, I'm going to boost you to 15 an hour during these 8 weeks because I have some money to spend. And then after the 8 weeks, I'm going to bring you back down to 10. That's a little dicey in my opinion. I would verify with your banker and your accountant, talk to them about that stuff. But if somebody's up for an annual raise, by all means, give them that earned raise if you can afford it, and it's still, doable. Or if you want to do, raises across the board or individually and continue those raises after the 8 weeks, perfectly acceptable. That's fine. So you can give raises. Just be careful if you're going to reduce that back to their prior rate after the 8 weeks and go from there. So hopefully that helps Abby clarify that. What if an employee left for another job opportunity and we don't need to replace them immediately? Do I get penalized for not replacing them if they didn't apply for unemployment? So if somebody voluntarily leaves, this is an excellent question, Kyle. And this has come up and further guidance is needed. Honestly, that's my short answer. But the question is, if an employee leaves on their own, leaves for another job or voluntarily, has nothing to do with COVID, and they leave your employment, so your headcount goes down, and maybe you don't need to rehire. My understanding as of right now, that would reduce your forgiveness amount. That's my understanding. If somebody knows different, please jump in. But I think further guidance on that is needed from everything I read. That was not specifically addressed in anything. And to be safe, you would really have to replace that role, even if you don't need it, just to get that head count to where it needs to be. If anybody knows different, jump in. I'm going to read the next question here. Does the clock start ticking when you get the money and it is looking at when the bills are being paid, such as payables, or when the money is actually paid out? Good question. So the clock starts ticking, yes, when you get the money. So the day you get the money, your 8 weeks starts that day. Now, is it looking at, this is the cash versus accrual basis, and maybe someone in the accounting field can answer this question better than me, but bills like rent and things and payables, is it cash or accruals? Anybody hearing anything else on that?
Not specifically, Joe, but I would assume it's going to be amounts paid.
Okay, as basically paid during that 8 weeks is what you're assuming, Adrian?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay. So it sounds like further guidance is still needed on that as well. But to be safe, pay it during that 8 weeks. Now, I did see, so on that same note, you can't go, it is not allowed to pay out 12 months of rent during that 8 weeks. So, if you have the next month of rent coming up, you might be able to do that. But you can't, write a check. If your rent's $1,000 a month, you can't write a $12,000 check to your landlord and say, I'm good for the next 12 months. That is not allowed, is my understanding. You can't prepay on that stuff. Same with utilities. You can't prepay that stuff. But cash versus accrual, when the money's paid or when it's due, further guidance needed. To be safe, go with cash, pay it now when you can. Okay. Bank told us last week we could count on the payroll processed on Wednesday and paid on Friday. We closed on Thursday. Yes, that is correct. So if you process your payroll, a couple days ahead of time, most payroll providers will require that. So if you process it, then your loan closed, and then the check date, if that check date falls after the loan closed, you should be fine to count that as part of your forgiveness. Yes. I'm doing it both ways, making sure my FTEs are the same average as prior and making sure my employees coming back are getting 75% of their income. Yes. So the income does need to be set. You have a little leeway there. It does need to be 75% of what they earned before. So it doesn't have to be 100%. So you do have a little leeway there. But yeah, make sure you do both. You've got to have the same headcount and the same wages. Otherwise, each one of those could reduce your forgiveness separately. So if you're low in headcount and you're low in wages, each of those items would reduce your forgiveness percentage. So just make sure you get both those to where they need to be. Questions coming in, instead of a raise, maybe a bonus. I asked the SBA this morning, I called them and specifically asked about bonus, and there wasn't a direct answer given. I read in one article that would be okay. The bankers I asked kind of frowned on it if it's not part of your normal business operations. So if you're just giving a bonus to give a bonus and spend the money, it wasn't really there's no exact guidance yet. I would hope that comes out in the next round, which should be the next couple of weeks. We see something, but there's no exact guidance. I would say talk to your lender, run that scenario by your lender, or call the SBA direct, 402-221-4691. Although I did that this morning and they didn't have an answer, so maybe you don't want to do that today. But bonuses are kind of up in the air. I would use your best discretion. If you normally give out bonuses, continue to do that. Normal business operations. If it's just a one-time bonus that you wouldn't normally pay, essentially what the SBA told me is it's unlikely they're going to be looking at that kind of detail, but they can't say for sure. So it might depend on who's doing your audit. Just like, with the IRS tax audits, there's probably a lot of different scenarios where one guy gets caught and the next person doesn't, right? Who knows? And caught is the wrong word because we're trying to use these funds to pay employee, but you get my drift there is it might depend on the lender if they reduce your forgiveness based on some of those things. So run it by them beforehand, always. Will Ideal provide a report to clients after the 8 weeks are up? Yes. So we have a specific report that is available, and either we can provide that or you can log online and run that anytime during the 8 weeks to know where you're at. So yes. All right. All right. I think I'm caught up on chat questions. Anybody want to come off mute and ask a question or throw one into the chat? Feel free.
Can I ask a verbal question? It's complicated.
Yes,
Joe,
please.
I have a question.
Yeah, go ahead.
So we only have 2 employees. So the money, if we find our bank will give us a chance to get in line, if we get this money, will that be treated as income and taxed at the end of the year as income tax? Sorry if this is not straight or if it's really an obvious answer, but I don't know.
No, good question. My understanding is no, it is not taxed as income. Adrian, you want to chime in and confirm, please?
Yeah, it's a forgivable loan. It's not taxable. It basically just go right to equity and not run it through your income statement.
Thank you.
My understanding is that, yeah, it is not taxable, but say you spend, you get $250,000 forgiven, your revenue would go up $250,000, so you get taxed on any profit you make off of that, correct?
I will defer to our accountants in the group on that one. So Adrian, or if anybody else wants to jump in on that one, any thoughts on that so far?
Just, I guess, the loan, any forgiveness is going to go directly to equity, won't be taxable. And then whatever's left that ends up being, it'll actually be a loan at 1%, paid over 2 years. And then whatever income you're earning from day to day, that's just basic operations like you normally would.
Okay. Thank you for the clarification there. So, and that's a good point. So, we're talking a lot about getting forgiveness and doing everything we can to get forgiveness. If you don't get 100% forgiveness, it's not the end of the world. It's okay, right? That's money that obviously either you can use, right? You can continue your operations using those funds. That's perfectly acceptable. Or you can pay it back, and it's a 1% interest rate on that loan. It just becomes a standard loan. You can pay it off when the 8 weeks is done, or again, you can continue to use that to fund your business. So not the end of the world if you don't get 100%. It's nice, obviously, we all want to get 100%, but it's not the end of the world if you don't. What about retirement contributions? Can they be increased? I did see that. So that's on 2 sides. Retirement contributions, if you have an employer plan, retirement contribution, if you're an employee, obviously you can increase your deductions from your check anytime you want. So likely, I'm assuming now I'm playing a financial planner on Zoom, but anyways, likely you can increase your deduction amount anytime you want as an employee. As far as the employer contributions, there may be some plan specific things that would require you to do some things. Again, check with your advisor on how you would increase your employer contribution. Like if you want to do a one-time employer contribution, I don't know if that's possible. It might depend on the type of plan you have and the specific rules in there, but any retirement contribution employer side would be part of forgiveness. So if you give a salary increase, that employer side will likely go up as well. I hope that helps, Rich. If not, jump back in. Let's see. If we open another checking account and maybe only use it for payroll, it could be forgiven. Yes, but that checking account will not be a perfect calculation. So the question is, if I open a separate checking account and only use it for payroll, all of that would be forgiven. And not necessarily, because there's some things in payroll like the federal employer portion of tax that is not forgivable. So if that comes out of that account, it wouldn't be forgivable. But let's say, I'll throw a scenario, just stick with me on this. If some of the funds that come out of your separate PPP account are not forgivable, but you're paying funds like rent, for example, out of a different account that wasn't funded by PPP, but those are eligible items, it's okay. Just have a paper trail. All right. It doesn't all have to come out of one account. It doesn't all have to be perfectly line itemed in your account or in your bank account. The paper trails and proof of everything is going to be what's critical at the end of that audit, is to say, yes, here's where that money went. It doesn't matter what account it comes out of, frankly. Just make sure you spend it and then have proof of how it was spent appropriately. Hopefully that helps. Since the funding of PPP is out, I'm currently trying to apply for EIDL. But Nebraska is not considered a disaster loan assistance area. I thought it was. Does anyone have the same problem? So EIDL, I believe, is also out of funds right now, and that might be part of the problem on applying for that. I saw some information from the SBA that said those were kind of one and the same. But if money goes back in here shortly, as expected, that should cover both. And so hopefully that helps. But I think both those programs are out of funds as of today and until they put more in. That's my understanding. And then I think that disaster loan area designation would come back. Do storage units count as rent since we are storing materials and equipment there? That is way beyond my expertise. I do not play a storage unit guy on Zoom. That's the one thing I don't do. So if anybody, if anybody does, feel free to jump in the chat or on Zoom, come off mute. Or Chris, I would say, check with your accountant, or there's some good accountants on this call. Check with them. Utilities are also covered by the PPP, correct? Yes. Does recycling count as utility? I don't know that. If anybody does know, feel free to jump in. I would check with your accountant on that, or your banker. I'm not sure specifically. I thought I saw a list somewhere, but I don't know if there's a specific list of utilities out there as far as recycling counting on that. But good question. Same with phone bills. I would assume phone bills do, but I don't know. Don't take me as gospel for that. That gets beyond my expertise of payroll stuff. But if anybody does know, feel free to jump in.
Question.
Yes.
There was, I do have the list, and the list says rent, and then below it, it says mortgage. I'm just wondering if there's an accountant on the line. Are they literally talking about mortgage as in the owner's home mortgage, or if they own a building?
I wouldn't think your home mortgage would be included in that. It'd be if you had a loan with a bank for business operations, the interest related to that would be part of that calculation.
Okay, so they're talking about mortgage on a building for, as in an office.
I think so. I don't think that would include your home mortgage on that.
Yeah, I didn't think so either. Just the wording. Thanks.
Cool. Thanks for jumping in there. Let's see. What if you pay some of your overhead items with a credit card? Is the payment to the credit card company for the overhead part of the forgiveness portion of the PPP? So let's say you're paying your utilities on your credit card. This gets, I should defer to Adrian and any other accounting expert on the call. I'm assuming, you can correct me if I'm wrong, is that utility payment on that credit card would qualify. There wouldn't be any reason it shouldn't, right?
You're correct, Joe. I mean, it's basically paid as cash as a credit card is. So you're fine. Perfect.
So yes, you can continue. You don't have to pay it directly out of that PPP account. Again, just bottom line, have a paper trail. Have a paper trail. Let's see. All right, I'm going to recap a little bit of the PPP stuff. So quickly, if you didn't get approved yet, talk to your banker. And if you don't like your banker's answer, talk to another banker. That's if you don't have funds yet. If you did get funds, forgiveness is important. Plan ahead. That's critical. Plan ahead. Work with your CPA, work with your bank, and plan ahead and track everything. Okay, track it as you go. The paper trail is going to be more important than where things come out of, like a bank account. Okay, so track everything and work with your CPA and bank when you have questions if something is or is not allowed. To get the full forgiveness, the best way you possibly can, calculate on gross payroll. Okay, not employer tax. That is not part of this, but gross payroll. You've got to spend 75% of the loan amount on gross payroll. You've got to keep your head count and your wage compensation levels to where they were prior to all of this happening. All right, so that's the bottom line of the keys to what's happening here. Another question. We received a small HHS stimulant payment. Is that subject to income tax at the end of the year? I will let our accountant, Adrian, handle that one. Or anybody else that wants to jump in. Feel free.
I assume that's a Medicare payment they got from HHS last week or the week before. That money, right as of right now, we don't know. There's no guidance on that, but as far as I know, it would be taxable, is our gut feeling, because all Medicare payments that you receive for services and stuff would be taxable, but there's no clear guidance on that yet. Stay tuned.
That's the other theme of the of the call. Stay tuned for more guidance. All right, if you have more PPP questions, feel free to jump in the chat or off mute. I do want to open it up to some further context here. So what are plans after the 8 weeks? All right, that question has come up to me in a couple different ways from clients and colleagues I've talked to. How are we preparing for after the 8 weeks? What's going to happen? Does anybody have any thoughts on that? I have some, of course, I will share, but I want this to be a conversation format. So does anybody want to jump in on that topic at all? No? Come on. No, that's all right. My thought is you got to prepare now, okay? So it's so easy to get wrapped up in this PPP stuff, and it's necessary, right? That's why we have these calls. It's necessary. But from a big picture standpoint, this is kind of we're at ground level on, get your PPP loan and, make sure your payroll's going right and things like that. That's ground level stuff. You got to step back. You got to look at, that 10,000 foot view a little bit and predict out where are we going after all of this. What's your business going to look like? Some things you're doing now may have to continue on, that maybe you didn't provide door-to-door delivery or, carrying the pizza box to the car for the customer or whatever it is before all this. Maybe that'll need to continue. I think we're all going to have to pivot is my point. We're going to pivot a little bit. Some industries are going to be a lot more extreme than others. Okay. If you, I don't know, my mind's blank on an example, but restaurants are obviously more severely impacted by this than other industries like hand sanitizer makers, right? So how are you pivoting? You're increasing volume on one end and the other side, they're at a decrease. But how can you pivot that to make it work even after all of this 8 weeks is done? And I think we've got to get creative in our own minds and understand that there's the opportunity there, and our business may not look exactly like it did 2 months ago. And that's okay. That's okay. We've just, as entrepreneurs, have to be creative enough to figure out where those opportunities are and understand that, it's here, maybe not here, and trial and error. There's no perfect answer. All right. So that's my thoughts on that. Anybody else want to jump in on that topic? 3 seconds, 2 seconds, 1, no? Okay, that's fine. All right, so every Monday, I will mention before we wrap up, obviously we're doing these calls every Monday. That will continue on because there's going to be new stuff this week. Last week I was thinking, there's not that much new to talk about. And guess what? There's a ton of new stuff because everybody got their money. So these are going to continue. So just keep marking your calendars. Monday, 10 a.m. Central. We'll continue to do this. And then the other thing is if we're starting to promote a small business of the day. So look for those coming out. And if your business wants to promote itself, that's part of what I'm talking about promoting and marketing yourself, then contact me, reach out to me. I sent a couple emails to our client list last week, and I'm opening that up to other contacts in my network as well. So if you want to promote your business through a quick call on Zoom, where we'll do a little, hey, who are you? What do you do? What customers do you help? And then we'll put that out on social media and all that stuff. Promote your business. It's free promotion. So contact me and we'll set it up, and I'll get an email out to everybody on our email list to sign up for that. But don't stop promoting your business. This is the time to lean into that and really do what you need to do to put yourself in position to succeed later. So, all right. Well, with that, appreciate everybody being here this week. Stay strong, support local. We'll see you next Monday. Thank you.